Hey everyone, I thought I would make a follow-up to the video I made the other day, which was on body awareness and communication. I also talked about the musicality of being. So if you didn't see that video, it might be worth watching that one first. I'm going to cover some different topics here, but I'm probably going to be building off of that first video a little bit. Just a really quick sketch. I talked about a number of signals that we can observe in our bodies that basically reflect the state of our well-being. And, we can observe those in any particular situation, but then we can notice in a conversation, in an interaction with another person, how the ups and downs of that interaction are actually going to be reflected moment by moment in our bodies. Now, I should also say that it's not that you should necessarily be tracking your breathing or tracking your posture moment by moment in a conversation. You're probably going to have your attention on the other person. They're talking, you're talking, and the conversation itself is where your attention is. But if you start to build this awareness, I think you'll find that the way you show up in conversation is different, and you have a little more capacity to be present and adaptable with the flow of what's happening in the conversation. So in that last video, I used 5 relationships that are always present: our relationship to breath, the ground, surrounding space, and sound and light. So these qualities are always there. These are some of the qualities we can track in our bodies. And these are some of the qualities that may be dynamically changing as we're in the flow of a conversation. But let's look at the actual conversation that we're having. You may have had this experience that they injured themselves, right? And maybe someone twisted their ankle, and then they start to tell you the story of how they twisted their ankle. And then they start to really get into the detail of how they stepped funny and the way, and suddenly you're wincing, because what are you doing? You are imagining the spraining of an ankle, and it's like you're almost imagining it with your whole body. It's not just a movie in your head. You're kind of thinking the thought and then feeling, what if I were to sprain my own ankle? Well, this is what happens. As soon as you start telling a story, you are putting a movie into the head of the other person. And in that example of the story of how I sprained my ankle, it might be visceral enough that you really notice how it picks up in your body. Now, it could also be that someone's telling you a story they went to the store and this happened and someone said some funny thing, but you're still kind of following the movie that their words are creating. And there's a way that, there's a moment in the story that's funny and, you laugh. Now, of course, you laugh when something's funny, but it's just worth underlining that there is a story told, and then your body is vibrating with laughter, right? So this is the music of interactions. Someone says something that sounds kind of, disgusting, and you have a bodily reaction to hearing about that. Anyways, I could give more examples, but this is how we share a simulation. And if you practice the Feldenkrais method, that's where I began with my body awareness practices. Something that you might find yourself doing in a class is, after practicing a particular movement, after some time, you might be invited to simply imagine the movement. And you might be invited to imagine the various details of the movement and even what it would feel like. And then you go back and do the movement, and lo and behold, the movement may have improved. Well, there's a lot of layers here, and I'm just going to invite you to sort of think along with me, imagine with me, but really just trying to get you to see that when someone is speaking, it's like they're playing a movie for you in your head, and that movie is an embodied experience, right? It's flowing through you. Here's another way of thinking about it. If you were playing pool and someone hit a ball and then it hit another ball, there's a certain causality there that we all understand. One ball hits the other. However, what could happen is you're playing pool and the one ball hits the other and you hear the sound, and you remember playing pool with your sister last year and you decide to call her. So that telephone call you made, in a sense, it was caused by the pool game. But really, it's like there was a leap that happened in your head, right? Well, when you're having a conversation, someone tells a story and it reminds you of a story that, a different story, or they they say some word that sounds like the name of someone you know, and you start thinking about that person, even though, it was just a coincidence. It was a sound that reminded you. But again, if you think of that other story, if you begin thinking about your friend, this too is a kind of reverberation in your body. So there's a kind of unknown element whenever two people get together and they begin talking, there is a current flowing. And in the last video, I was talking about the rhythm of the speech and whether the two people are able to sort of match their energies and things like that. But there's also just this wild card of, all the associations in the minds of both of the people and how those can also play out through the body. In particular, let's say that you have a conversation with someone, maybe on a political topic, and they state their point of view and you state your point of view, and maybe your point of view, you've had that for quite a long time. So when the topic comes up, you kind of know what you're going to say, and you have a certain confidence in that. But then perhaps this person says something that had never occurred to you, and they get to you to consider the whole thing in a different light. And you start noticing that maybe there's a different position on this issue that maybe makes sense after all. It's not what you used to think, but you find yourself drawn to this new position. In other words, you have a conversation with someone, it could change your mind. You could find that you walk away from that conversation with a new point of view. You could be in a conversation with someone and you could fall in love, right? So again, we all know this, but a conversation can literally change how you see the world. And the moment that you see the world differently, that too is going to be a different configuration of the body. It's going to be a different relationship to perception. I'll give you a different example to tie that in. Let's say I'm looking at the sunset. Beautiful sunset. Well, what if I'm really depressed? What if there's just nothing in my world that I really can accept as beautiful right now? It might be that the beauty of the sunset doesn't really reach me. Or it could be, maybe I just had that conversation, I just fell in love, and then I see the sunset and it's more radiant than it's ever been. And you might say the sunset is just the sunset, but because of what else is happening with me, I have a different kind of perception. Well, so coming back to this idea that I could go into a conversation with one worldview and I could come out of the conversation with maybe a bit of a different worldview, this could be a shift in my body. And now I'd like to come back to Feldenkrais to give you a little more of a explicit image of what I mean by changing your mind and how that results in changing your body. So this is a quotation from Moshe Feldenkrais, the founder of the Feldenkrais method. He said, "A fundamental change in the motor basis within any single integration pattern will break up the cohesion of the whole and thereby leave thought and feeling without anchorage in the patterns of their established routines. In this condition, it is much easier to effect changes in thinking and feeling, for the muscular path through which thinking and feeling reach our awareness has changed and no longer expresses the patterns previously familiar to us. Habit has lost its chief support, that of the muscles, and has become more amenable to change." So I'll put that quotation in the caption under the video in case you want to read through it again. But what he's talking about there, and he's describing the practice of the Feldenkrais method, is that you can do a series of physical movements and use your attention in a particular way. Attention is a very important part of the Feldenkrais method. And you can essentially change your posture. You can change the habitual way that you organize the musculature in your body. So if I'm kind of slumped and, this is how I move around, and then I do a Feldenkrais practice, and let's say it improves my posture and I come to this upright place. Well, as I move through the world with this uprightness, as opposed to moving through the world like this, the way that I am going to show up in a conversation, the way that I am going to think about my life, maybe you don't notice a difference like 1 minute to the next, but if I spend my whole time in this sunken shape, right, that's going to change my whole experience of the world. And now I'd like to get into just one more metaphor that kind of bridges the gap between communication and body awareness and shape. But I think you'll see it's a pretty literal metaphor. It is about shape. It is about size. And it might build off of, you can imagine those two postures I gave, just a general sort of I'm upright versus I'm slumped. If you think about it, if you and I are together and we're talking, if we've just met, when I say to you something like, oh, where did you grow up? Well, before you open your mouth to answer my question, I literally don't know, right? And then you say, oh, I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. That's where I was born. And so now you have taken something that was invisible to me and you have put it out into the light. You have revealed something. It was already known to you in your interior, but I couldn't, so to speak, see it. I didn't know this about you. And this is true for anything. I ask you how you're doing because I don't know how you're doing, and you tell me. I ask you, what did you do today? Because I don't know, and then you tell me. Especially though, if we are talking about some question of the emotions or some secret that I don't tell most people, but maybe I've decided to tell you, right? We get into this question of vulnerability. And again, I like this idea of there's something that is hidden to the other and I reveal it. I open myself up to show what's inside. And this question of being open versus being closed, no, I'm going to hide this from you. I don't want you to know this. This is what's happening as we talk as well. Of course, I can make up a story. I can tell you that I was born in Idaho, even though that's not true. I could make up a story, right? I could create a movie in your head about me that isn't real. There's all kinds of variations. But what we can think about is that there's this sort of known and unknown, and then we're sharing that, and the unknown becomes the known. And this is what's happening between us as we talk. So if we think about the musicality of a conversation, as I was speaking about in the previous video, well, if I tell you I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, you might just sort of think, okay, that's where he was born. But if I tell you a secret or something that you wouldn't have known about me, our relationship just changed in that moment. So you might be surprised by what I told you in the moment, but it's also a shift in how much we know each other, which might shift, what feels comfortable in terms of the physical distance between us. It might change the way you pay attention to me. Maybe I just revealed something to you that makes you realize, oh, this person is actually pretty interesting. Maybe I want to have them be my friend. It's like now maybe you're leaning in or you're listening differently. Maybe I revealed that, I like to go to a certain kind of martial arts class and you used to practice that martial art. And now we have something to talk about. But that realization, we have something to talk about. That too is a change in the energy. So there's all kinds of things like this, but I'm just trying to demonstrate all the ways that a conversation is bubbling in our bodies moment by moment. And again, just to highlight this point from Feldenkrais, what we see in our worldview, our habits, our beliefs, they're very much tied in with our posture, the way we carry our body. And so we could say that our postures are even formed in conversation. Actually, I'll tell one last story just because this is kind of free form how I'm making the video, but this reminded me, it's a little bit of a kind of a sad story, but a colleague of mine who is a Feldenkrais practitioner told me that once she went out to dinner at a friend's house and, she observed the family. And what she noticed was that the young boy was kind of afraid of his father. His father spoke very loudly and, the boy would kind of like shrink a little every time the father spoke. And if I'm that little boy, the father was sitting over to one side. And so what would happen is the father would speak and the boy would turn to see the father turning in that direction, but also would shrink. And my colleague observed that over and over, because of the social dynamic in this conversation, the child would turn and sink and turn and sink. And what she said to me, and you can just watch me as I do this, she said, I could see the beginnings of scoliosis, right? So there's a relationship here that at the dinner table, in any case, is just unfolding as the exchange of words. And who knows what else happens between father and son, right? But in that repeating interaction of we sit every night at dinner, and maybe like in my family, I always sat in the same seat. Well, I turn to my right and I see my mother. I turn to my left and I see my father. And over time, my relationship to my mother might imprint the way I tend to hold my body when I'm turned to the right and to the left with my father. So this is the idea. There's just a million different possible constellations of all these things. There's nothing here to tell you exactly why, our bodies are the way we are or how we respond to any given conversation. But again, I just think that it's cool to make these connections, maybe not connections you've thought about before. So I'll wrap it up here. But once again, I would really love to hear any thoughts you had on this. What does it open up for you? Maybe I'll keep going on this theme. I'm enjoying it so far. But that's it for today. See you soon.